The way the world works is you may take a small step today or open up one door, but whenever you do that, whenever you say yes to opportunity, I promise you 10 other doors will open up that you can't see right now until you open up that first door.
If a 1031 is your exit strategy, you're not exiting anything. How can an individual investor start their own REIT, and what does that look like? Trust is an alternative to an LLC, and there's so much discussion about whether or not we should put our properties in an LLC. I hear hardly any discussion about should we put our properties in a trust. If you're a real estate investor, if you're a year or 2 or 5 or 10 into your investing journey and you own rental properties, take $500, go sit down with an attorney for a couple of hours and talk about this stuff, because I promise you it will save you more than $500 worth of pain and heartache in the long run. You're listening to Copeland Morgan Media, your source for investment property analysis, education, and advice. Find us online at copelandmorgan.com. Well, welcome back, folks, and thank you for tuning in. I'm super excited to have in the studio today Gary Wilson. Gary is head of the Global Investor Agent team at EXP, where he oversees 132 agents in 28 states. And Gary, I don't even know how you have time to sit down for lunch, keeping track of all those moving pieces. He's also the host of the Massive Passive Cashflow podcast, so be sure to check that out on your favorite podcast app. Before we dive into to Gary's intro, I want to mention that today's episode is brought to you by Republic Bank. Republic Bank is located right here in St. Petersburg, Florida. Amy St. Hart, the vice president there, has been a guest on the show, and they are a great commercial lender here in the Tampa Bay area. They like to focus on multifamily and other types of commercial loans. So if you're looking to move up into the 5 or more unit multifamily space or other types of commercial real estate, be sure to give a Republic Bank a chance to at least give you a rate sheet and look at some of the terms and loan products that they offer. You can find them at republicbank.com or reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with Amy. So back to you, Gary. Welcome. How on earth do you manage 132 agents in 28 states and still have hair on your head?
Yeah. Well, it actually goes back to having systems. So years before I was in the privately in real estate, I was in banking. And I managed 10 different business systems in the world of mergers and acquisitions. So as you imagine in banking, there's everything's very well structured, organized, systematized. So all it is, I brought that into the world of real estate. So it's not like I'm actively managing 132 people. I probably manage maybe 5 people. Yep, and it kind of trickles down from there. So I do spend time coaching everyone, though. That's the one thing I do is everybody, I want to know them and what they're doing and coach them to be successful.
Yeah, that's great. It's always good to have that hands-on approach to people, because that's really our greatest resource. I find it interesting that you brought over a lot of the systems and teams mentality from banking. We talked about this a couple times on recent episodes, that so many people in real estate are sort of serial entrepreneurs or serial business people. People come over from banking, from finance, from all different walks of life. People have bought and sold other businesses, and they ultimately land in real estate. And one of the great things about real estate is no 2 deals are alike, no 2 brokerages are alike, no 2 days, weeks, or months are alike for most of us who are investors, brokers, agents, etc. It's always something different. And a lot of those skills that you import from other industries, you plop them in and they apply. You can, it's like falling off a log, as they say. You can use those skills from other industries and other businesses in your real estate business.
Yes. Yeah, the thing I like about real estate is it allows you to be an entrepreneur, basically be free. In the corporate world, you really can't be free. You're building someone else's business. Here you can build your own business, and yet if you do have some systems ability, you can really go pretty far with this. Because most agents, I'm sure you recognize, traditional owner-occupant agents. I'm not knocking the wonderful people, but they're basically solo, operators. They don't have a lot of systems and structure. So when you bring that to the business, it allows you to be a business person and not just opening doors and pointing out the pretty carpet.
Yeah, I'm going to credit another broker by the name of Bob McDougald for this saying or this quote, but he used to say there's freedom in structure. Yes. So if you have systems in place to help you stay on track, accomplish your daily task. As much work as it can be to set up those systems, once you have that system and that structure in place, there's freedom in structure, because now you can just focus on the income producing activities or the things that you enjoy, and let the system take care of the rest.
Yeah, absolutely true. So what's cool is, I'm an investor first. So I've been investing since January 1986. I left the corporate world in August 2003. I got my broker's license, January 2002. So about 18 or so months later is when I left the corporate world. And what allowed me to leave is, yes, I had a bunch of properties. In fact, I was making as much money for my investments as I was making from the corporate world. And so when I started working with my license, I didn't want anybody knowing I had my license to begin with. I just wanted it for myself to invest. But when people started finding out, I realized, well, there's another potential stream of income here. I didn't realize how easy it was going to be, because it was like the Wild Wild West. There was no organization, no structure. So all I did is just bring in a few key character traits. That's all it was, and allowed me to grow a lot more rapidly than probably the average agent. So.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation, because I have a similar parallel to it. I was working full time in, not so much in the corporate world, but in government, county and higher education, and doing real estate on the side. Had my real estate license, and gradually you start to build up that book of business on the real estate side. But you're right, it's almost a secret. You don't want your employer knowing that you're out there doing real estate deals at lunchtime. So you're not really, everybody says to get your sphere of influence. Everybody needs to know that you have your real estate license. That's harder when you're still working a 9 to 5, and you don't necessarily want to advertise to your boss that, hey, I got to get out of here by 6 p.m. because I got a showing or a home inspection or whatever. And so, I think it's interesting for a lot of our listeners who have their real estate license and are still out there working a 9 to 5. We feel your pain. We've been there and done that. But I can also say, at least in my experience, when you finally make that clean break from the corporate world, or from whatever 9 to 5 you're working, and you can just kind of relax and be one person, just be that real estate broker, that real estate investor, that real estate agent, and not have to wear 17 different hats and manage your daily work schedule plus your real estate stuff. It is incredibly freeing. It's just a nice feeling. I found it very stressful, always having to switch between 9 to 5 stuff and real estate stuff and wear multiple hats, and that stress goes away. There's new stress. Now you've got to grind, you've got to make money, you've got to be successful in real estate. But it's a really, really great feeling when you can just be that real estate person instead of trying to be Mr. 9 to 5 banker and then Mr. After Hours real estate agent. Did you find that kind of similar?
Oh, yeah. What's interesting is, in a comical way, when I did retire from the corporate world, for the next year, I actually felt guilty. It was a struggle for me to get used to not getting up and going to be at work at 6 a.m. to avoid traffic and parking. But the reality is I finally got used to it, and I actually worked harder that next year, because I was watching my neighbors drive off in the morning going to work wearing a suit and tie, and I'm sitting on my deck drinking coffee and reading the paper. But I started working really hard and built up the portfolio even more. And what I realized, when I was using my license, it also brought me other deals that I would not have otherwise gotten, because I'm helping other investors make good decisions, and they can't buy everything. Nobody can. We like to, but we can't. So what I realized is, okay, I'm going to approach every deal one or two ways, either as an investor, and if it doesn't work for me as an investment, then I'll put on my broker hat and serve someone else and help them get the deal, and I get a commission. And vice versa. If I go to meet somebody because I'm going to list a 20-unit building or something, and I realize, well, you know what, this thing's got a lot of hair on it, but maybe I could take this under my belt and clean it up and take care of it myself, then I'll do that. So no matter how you slice it, the core set of activities is the same, but now you can profit in at least two different ways, and really a lot more.
Yeah, that's another interesting point, that transactions lead to more transactions. So if you're new out there, if you're an investor, if you're a real estate agent, you just got your license, or you're just getting started, just try to get that first one under your belt. That's always the hardest. But that one deal will often lead to 2 or 3 more, because now you're out there, you're being seen, you're in the mix. And that one deal often leads to a couple more deals. Those deals lead to a couple more deals. It almost goes viral, and it takes years, don't get me wrong, but after 2, 3, 4, 5 years of the grind, you should have enough deals flowing your way, that you can spend less time on that lead generation or paying for leads from Zillow or whatever, and focus on your core base of clients. So it does take time, but there is a path to get you there.
Absolutely. The other thing too I like about it is I learned this in banking. We call it larger share of wallet. So if you think about the banking industry, how it transformed in the 1980s during deregulation, Reagan made it so the banks could compete more with each other based on service and product, and it wasn't a commodity. So what happened is they started offering more services and more products. They already had the client. So the theory is if you already got the client, getting the client is the most expensive part of business, earning that relationship through marketing, advertising. So if you already have the client, what else can you offer them? As long as you're good at it, do it. So I ended up building a property management company. I built a title company in different states. Sometimes it's called escrow. Basically, whoever does the settlement. I created that company. I had an appraisal company, and we were actually getting ready to launch our own bank. And this was 2009, and that's when Congress came out with the new rules about lending and appraisals. So literally at the 11th hour, I mean, it was literally 11 o'clock at night, and we're sitting at this table getting ready to sign the documents with another banker or a lawyer. And I said, you know what, we're not going to do it. And they looked at me like I'm crazy. I said, I just got a bad feeling about this. And sure enough, when Congress came out with those rules, it would have been not disastrous, but it would have not been successful.
The whole affiliated business disclosures. Correct. And all that kind of stuff.
And really, when it comes to I already had the appraisal business, and that we weren't established for like 30 years. It was pretty new. And when you had that, the appraisal business and the lending business, they don't like to see that combination.
Right. Yeah, it's all about consumer protection on the residential side.
Yeah. But Jeff, that's really what led to the phrase people hear, well, what is massive passive cashflow method? And really what it comes down to is, for me, it was opening up those other businesses to serve the same clients. But for everybody listening, what it really means to you is you're already engaged in a certain set of activities. How can you leverage that multiple ways, generate multiple streams of income through real estate ownership, through brokerage? If you're an investor and you don't have your license, you're missing out on a lot. And I'll tell you this. I started studying we used to call them the late night gurus, infomercials, Than Merrill from Fortune Builders. I know him. Carlton Sheets, he's since passed away right here in Florida. All of them, every one of them had their license. And I thought, well, they're telling us we don't need our license, and yet they have their license. I thought, well, I'm going to do what they do and not what they say, and got my license, and the rest they say is history. I'm sitting here today, not because of all the properties I own, but because of all the businesses I built, all around having that license,
Yeah, that's a great point. I know there's two schools of thought on that. If you're in the Bigger Pockets forums, it's a popular real estate forum online, and there's a whole band of people there that are anti-real estate license. You don't need it. You don't want it as a real estate investor, because now you have to play by these rules and states and the expense associated with your license. I'm right there with you, Gary. Getting your real estate license is the single best thing you can do to advance and fast forward your real estate investing career, because it opens up those multiple income streams like you talked about. It gives you an instant 3% discount on every deal you look at on the MLS. It gives you a sense of legitimacy when you're dealing with other agents and brokers. So if you're on the fence and you're a new investor and you're thinking, shouldn't I get my real estate license? My advice is wholeheartedly get your license. It's not going to hurt anything. And the cost that you pay to join the local board or whatever, you'll make that back on your first deal.
Peanuts. Well, it goes back to the old parable about the daughter making a ham for her family for the first time, and she cuts the ends off, and she calls her mom. How do I prepare this ham? She says, well, make sure you cut the ends off. Well, at 2 years, she's wondering, why are we cutting the ends off the ham? She said, oh, well, Grandma, let's call Grandma. Grandma says, well, I cut the ends off because they wouldn't fit in the pan. So all these people saying they'll get your license, just know this. They're only saying that because that's what they were told. And they were told, that person was told that from people going back in the 70s, even the 50s. It's just not true anymore. It's a brand new world. I mean, you can do transactions anywhere in the world, and you can do it much more easily if you've got that license.
Yeah, I've got a great little anecdote there. I have an agent on my team. He's an E4 or an E5 in the Coast Guard. So, you can look that up and know that an E4 in the military is not making big money.
Right.
And so he got his real estate license, but he was really hesitant to activate it. He's like, I don't have the $1,000 or $1,200 or whatever it is to pay all my dues with the board and get set up with the MLS. And so he was on the fence for 2 or 3 months. I was talking to him, and finally he scraped up enough money or saved it or used his credit card or whatever, and he jumped in and he paid his dues. And I think about 6 weeks later, he had a $7,000 commission check. And probably that year, he made about an extra $30,000 in commission income. And again, go back and look at those pay scales. He's probably making more on these little side hustle real estate deals than he was making from his primary job in the military. Now, I'm a veteran, and I'm not knocking the military or military pay scale. I'm just pointing out that don't be afraid to spend $1,000, because that $1,000 could lead to 20, 30, 40, $100,000 within a few years in real estate if you do it right.
Well, when I was mentioning earlier that when I left the bank, I was able to, because I had enough income coming in from my rental properties to match or beat my corporate income. The reality is, going forward with the use of my license in the first year, Jeff, I made $110,000 in commissions my first year. Well, I was still working, Yeah,
I had a similar experience. My last real job or corporate job for someone else, I was the director of risk management for a local community college district, and I had left maybe say January of that year. Well, I remember my boss calling me. He was the vice president of finance for the college, and I remember him calling me about March. And I could tell he was feeling me out, like, how's it going out there, And I could tell he wanted me to come back. He wouldn't come right out and say it. Hey, would you please come back? Your position's still vacant. We can't find anybody to fill it. But I didn't tell him this, but I remember thinking, I made more money this month in March than you paid me my salary for the entire year. There is no way I'm going back to working for the man. So. It's not an instant thing. That was after years of building up the little side hustle. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's
Absolutely.
usually not an approaching train. So
yeah, well, the way the world works is, you may take a small step today or open up one door, but whenever you do that, whenever you say yes to opportunity, I love the quote by Richard Branson. He says, whenever someone offers you an incredible opportunity, you always say yes, even if you don't think you can do it. You will learn how. Anybody that sold a 100-unit building didn't start off selling a 100-unit building. They started selling off a single-family home, for example. But what I'm getting back to is this. When you open up one door, I promise you 10 other doors will open up that you can't see right now until you open up that first door. And that's how the world works.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember selling a $3,000 lot in South St. Petersburg, because at the time I was new and I was young, and I wanted to learn how to sell vacant land. And every deal counted towards my annual cap. And so I've sold $3,000 pieces of dirt, and I've sold multi-million-dollar apartment buildings. But you learn something from every deal.
Yep.
So Gary, you are a tough person to interview, because you have literally done it all for decades. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording about, what do we dive into? Because you've done single family flips, you've done buy and hold, you've done multifamily, you've done 100-unit apartment buildings. But one of the things that really jumped out at me when we were talking earlier is you have helped investors establish both a mutual fund in one case and a privately held real estate investment trust, a REIT.
Correct.
Is and a privately held, is that the right way to say it?
You can call it that, yeah, for the sake of understanding, and we can get into the details that'll help people understand how it works.
Yeah, so let's start with the mutual fund, because I want to save the REIT for last. I think that's a really interesting possible sort of exit strategy for a lot of real estate investors with a big portfolio. But how in the world did you get into the mutual fund business?
Yeah. So here's what happened. I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm not from there, but I was living there at the time. I was married and raised the kids there. Pittsburgh has been, and probably will be, for one of the best markets to invest in. I probably can we scratch that, because I don't want everybody competing with me. No, just kidding.
We can edit it out if you want to.
But it's
the
public.
cat's out of the bag.
Yeah, I mean, everybody kind of knows. But so what happened is, when the recession really kicked in, I all of a sudden started getting calls from people from Wall Street. I mean, like BlackRock Financial, White Oak, all these big companies, and they were saying, we need to deploy a lot of money. And one of them, I think it was White Oak, said, we need to deploy $100 million. And I said, I'm pretty good. But if you try to deploy $100 million here in Pittsburgh, it's going to change the landscape because they're looking at single family homes and stuff. So that went on for a while. I got off some of those deals, but all of a sudden this tobacco commodities broker called me out of the blue. He had heard about me through some other person. I don't know what the connection was. I've been on the radio a few times, but I would still, and I still am today, just a regular person. I will say I'm a hard worker, and I'm totally, when I get into something, I just completely dive in and focus. So in any case, this guy calls me and he said, look, we want to buy portfolios of properties. And I said, great, we can probably find you some portfolios around here. In fact, I have one or two myself, So he said, but I want to do it in a mutual fund. And then all of a sudden my radar goes up. I said, really? How does this work? And he said, well, if this was your lucky day, young man, I'm going to actually bring you on board and show you how it's done from the inside. And he did. He came down to Pittsburgh from New York, and he told me that a lot of Wall Street guys were leaving Wall Street in droves and getting into real estate. And many of you know this because you recognize the hedge funds were buying giant, what we call tapes. These tapes are a string of mortgages, maybe $100 million, $1 billion in mortgages. And then they take those mortgages and keep some of the mortgages, and some of them they sell the properties. Well, this guy was in tobacco. He wasn't into the hedge funds. He introduced me to his attorney from New York. We drew up these documents. You have to have a private offering memorandum. Basically, it's still syndication. So you do, anybody who wants to do this, you do have to have a knowledgeable attorney help you do this. I'm not an attorney, but I've been blessed to know some pretty good ones. So that's part of the structure is you have to have it correctly documented. You have to submit everything to be approved. You can't just say, I'm going to go out there and create a mutual fund. You have to submit documents to the federal government, the SEC, and they have to approve it. So we created this, it's called a closed-end mutual fund, which means it's closed to certain people. And you have to, at the time, you had to have what's called accredited investors. These are folks that had $1 million in net worth and $250,000 in income on an annual basis. Now, after the Obama administration, I think he reduced some of those requirements for any other syndication going forward. But back to this. So create this mutual fund, okay? And he had all the contacts to raise funds to buy shares of the mutual fund. The mutual fund, in this case, was not going to own stocks or bonds. It was going to own real estate, and small real estate, anything up to including 4 units, which was perfect because that means every agent can participate in this. So he raised several $1 million, and some investors were as small as $10,000, some were $100,000, and we had enough to buy several portfolios of properties, hundreds of properties and units. And then what he did is said, look, we're going to sell some of the properties. And by the way, the whole arrangement here, guys, remember I said a moment ago, when you open one door, 10 other doors will open up, but you will never see those 10 doors until you open up the first door. The first door for me was saying I'm going to get my license, okay? This is one of those 10 doors. What happened is because he had contacted me and I was the broker, that meant I got all of the sales commissions from all those sales of those portfolios, okay? All the purchases. I got all the management contracts to manage all those properties while we held them under the mutual fund. And then when we sold some of the ones that made most sense to sell now, we sold them, and then we used that to pay off the small investors. So we only kept the bigger investors. I got all those commissions, okay? And the bigger investors, by the way, they didn't just get like 10%. We gave them a combination of 3 things: either a interest on their money, a share of equity, and or profit share. Any combination of those 3 things is what the big investors got out of it. So we bought and sold more portfolios, and out of all that, looking back on it at that time, I probably could have retired at that point, just based on that one deal, that one mutual fund, that one contact that happened because I said yes years earlier to getting my license. And the irony is this: my wife used to bring people to me, say, hey, my friend so-and-so at the gym needs to buy a house. And I'd say, honey, I don't do that. I don't do open houses. I don't put cookies in the oven. I don't put balloons out front. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. And I don't want to do that. And after about 100 times, I'm thinking, well, Jeff, maybe God's trying to tell me something. So I said, I'll say yes, but I'll say yes only to investors. And here's the comical part. I was on the radio a couple of times. People would invite me to be on their business show on Saturday morning. And this one guy was a person who taught people how to invest in real estate. And he said, would you come to one of my classes on a Saturday just to have lunch, let people meet a real investor, because he could tell I was just a regular guy too, and I'm, can talk to anybody. And, I did that a few times, and I would come in and teach once a month on a half a day on a Saturday, and just a couple hours and go to lunch. Well, they found out I had my license, and they all started asking me, can you help me invest too? And I said, I'm sorry, I don't do that. I'll teach you, but I don't use my license for that purpose. And that's when I realized I should probably say yes. And here's the funny part I'm getting to. So I go into class, maybe 25 people, and I said, look, I can probably take 2 of you on. Now, what happens when you tell a group of 25 people that only 2 of them can do the thing they all want to do? Well, scarcity and urgency was my first marketing lesson, and that was the beginning of me building that whole line of business and eventually building a brokerage. And that's what led to me getting the introduction to this tobacco commodities broker. So.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point there that, especially for new real estate agents, it's find your little niche. Find the thing that you like to do. Find the thing that you want to do. If you want to work with first-time home buyers, great. Be the best in your market at it. Now, be warned, everybody else in your market is doing the same thing. But many of us, and probably many of our listeners, are more drawn or lean towards the investor side of things. And so if you want to be a good investor agent, it probably helps to be an investor first. Mm-hmm. And what that leads to is those doors opening, like you said. You travel, talk, go to class in these investor circles, and before you know it, these investors are asking you to help them buy. Mm-hmm. They're asking you to help them manage, and you find those multiple income streams: brokerage income, commission income, property management income, and some of the affiliated businesses and things that you mentioned as well. So on to back to the mutual fund. I think that's really interesting because there's 2 sides to it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but on the right hand, this fund is buying real estate. So you're earning commission on the real estate deals and helping them, find, analyze, acquire, manage real estate, just like any real estate broker might. On the left-hand side, the mutual fund is taking the money from the investors and charging them, I'm assuming, transaction fees or management fees like any mutual fund does. And so there's kind of this dichotomy between the real estate side of things and the investing SEC mutual fund side of things that most of us don't ever see. Like you said, he kind of sat you down and showed you the inner workings of a mutual fund, and I find that really interesting. So
the person I was describing, he actually earned all of those mutual fund management fees. I didn't get those. He got those. But you're right. So just to make sure everybody understands here, we have the properties themselves that were being bought. They had to be purchased with real money. Okay, that money came from other people that were providing the funding, just like they're buying shares of the mutual fund, like you would buy shares of a stock. They put the money in the entity. You can call it like a corporation if you want to say entity. It was those funds that we used to buy the portfolios. So those people got a return on their funds. I got all these commissions and management fees, and the gentleman who helped establish it all got the mutual fund company management fees from that entity, and that it's win-win all the way around. Yeah.
And so the key difference there from a syndication deal, for example, is in a syndication, you've got 10 investors, somebody pools their money, and they use that money to take down one property. In the case of a mutual fund, you're pooling the money, and then they're trusting the fund manager and that team to buy the real estate, and they don't necessarily know which real estate is going to be bought and sold. It's more of a not blind trust, but it's more putting your faith in the fund manager to buy the right assets.
What people usually recognize as the term REIT, R-E-I-T, Real Estate Investment Trust, different legal structure than a mutual fund, but essentially the same exact concept, the same principle, the same process. So you and I, all the listeners here, we can go online right now and research REITs. They're like what's the big Fidelity Mutual Funds. They have a great online system. You can go in there and analyze all the different mutual funds, not just their own, but other companies like Franklin Templeton and Vanguard. And in there, you'll see all these REITs that you can analyze and research and invest in. So a REIT is technically a trust, whereas a mutual fund is a different type of, you do have escrow responsibilities. You got fiduciary responsibilities with both, but the trust is just a different legal structure,
Yeah, so for the real estate investors out there who throughout so much of the country, inventory is so tight, and if you're fortunate enough to be sitting on a pile of cash and you can't find any real estate deals to buy, A secondary or another option is to put your money into a real estate investment trust or a real estate related or based mutual fund. It's sort of a secondary, a step removed from actually owning the dirt, but you're still investing in real estate and you're still enjoying the fruits of the real estate market. And so if you haven't looked into it, learn a little bit about real estate investment trusts. And that is certainly a viable investment opportunity if you're unable to find the actual real estate. And the other thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, you can buy into a REIT and keep your money there for a year or two. You can essentially take your money out whenever you want, subject to capital gains, and then redeploy that into real estate. And if you find a good 1031 qualified intermediary, you can even go in and out of REITs as a 1031 exchange. And so there's a lot of interesting opportunities there on the REIT side.
Absolutely, yeah.
But what we talked about earlier and what I mentioned, before we dove into the mutual fund thing, is you have actually been involved in establishing or creating a privately held REIT for an individual investor. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And so I find that is a really interesting exit strategy for, say an investor who's in his 30s or 40s now and he owns 100, 200 doors or, multiple different types of real estate. Well, maybe 10 or 20 years from now, it's time to either sell off that portfolio when it comes time to retire, or somehow shift the focus of their portfolio because they're at the other end of their real estate investing career. It's not time to buy and build your portfolio. It's time to sell it or downsize it and retire. How can an individual investor start their own REIT, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. When I first got involved with one of these, I knew what a REIT was. And what happened is I had helped one of my clients buy a 20-unit building from an investor in Pittsburgh who was from Philadelphia, and it was his father who owned 900 units of student housing, okay? And the father wanted to retire. He was 84 years old, I believe. And yet he didn't want to just flat and sell out everything and have to pay all the capital gains. He also wanted to leave something for his children. So what we worked out was this. I said, look, why don't you create a REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust? We'll have the attorneys draw everything up. You'll be the principal of the REIT. You're going to be the main guy, okay? The REIT is going to sell shares of the REIT. So other investors will give you money. They'll put money into the REIT. They'll buy shares of the REIT, just like you buy shares of a stock or another mutual fund. And then that REIT will buy your properties from you. So you're going to sell your own properties to the REIT that you just established, okay? And his property management was in-house. It was internal. I said, let's spin that off, make a separate entity out of that, build a separate property management company. The REIT will subcontract to the management company to manage the very same properties. So now he's essentially still doing the same thing he was doing. He maintained control. He got all this fee income from the mutual fund, also 2 sources of fee income. One source of fee income was him as the principal of the REIT. So all the management fees of the REIT, he got that. The management fees from property management, he got that from what used to be his own internal property management. Now it's a separate company. And of course, the big thing is he was able to cash out. He was able to pull all the value out of his properties and yet still maintain some control. So he got what he wanted. He got his money out, and he was able to pass on a legacy to his children in the form of a REIT and the property management company. And they could decide to be involved or not if they wanted to, but regardless, they would all get some residual income from that. So I thought it was a really good idea. And I started noticing other people doing this later. Another person I knew in Pittsburgh had 60 single-family homes. And, same thing, he just wanted to get rid of them. And he was going to do a 1031 exchange, except he didn't want to be involved in real estate anymore. And I said, if you do an exchange, you will definitely be involved in real estate. You got to buy more bigger properties, right? I think I just made an English snafu there. More, better. I don't know if that's a good
More,
term.
better, bigger. But yeah, you're right. We talked about that earlier. If a 1031 is your exit strategy, you're not exiting anything. You're just upgrading to more or different or different properties. And if you're looking to get out of real estate, a 1031 exchange won't get you there.
Correct. Yeah, that's one thing. I'm not knocking 1031 exchange. I mean, I've done them. I don't do them anymore. And it's only because I'll just tell you this. We use trust to own properties now. And inside of a trust, as long as the property doesn't change hands, it remains inside the trust, you can sell beneficiary rights. And that's different than selling the property. So you avoid, capital gains, you avoid transfer taxes, all this stuff you avoid, yet you maintain control. And somebody else is getting the beneficiary rights. They're going to get the rewards of the property. So that's a different subject altogether. But back to this, I know I just turned 59 years old. I believe I've still got plenty of gas left in the tank. Lord willing, I'll be here, until I'm 100. Who knows? But I also know this is I don't want to be actively involved with managing my own properties anymore. I've done it for so many years. I don't see I'm not attached to that anymore. I definitely like the ownership, and I like the value that I get out of it, the equity. I like the cash flow, but I'll be darned if I want to take a single phone call anymore. I haven't taken a phone call for years, and using these strategies allow me to do this. And like back to the gentleman with single family homes, you could do that with 4 single family homes if you want to. You could do it with a couple of fourplexes or duplexes. You don't have to have hundreds and thousands of units to do this strategy. I've been told other people are doing it with smaller numbers of properties. It's a great exit strategy that's not that hard to do. It's just a matter of reading and studying and speaking to the right people, and absolutely having a good real estate attorney that knows how to do these things. So.
Yeah, and in your example, the guy created his own property management company, but that's not to say you couldn't create the REIT, keep however many shares you want, sell the remaining shares, make the management fees on the transactions, and then hire some third-party external property management company to deal with the day-to-day, and then that allows you to just take a step back. And I think we should probably put in a plug here that neither you nor I are attorneys, nor are we CPAs, but the underlying theme here is find a good CPA, find a good attorney, and talk about some of these strategies, creating a REIT, creating a mutual fund, creating a self-directed IRA, creating a trust. These are all ways to package, buy, sell properties, minimize taxes, minimize capital gains. And these are things that you need to learn about, especially as your portfolio starts to grow above a certain critical mass. These things start to become critical. If you're talking about 15 or 20% capital gains tax that you can avoid by employing one of these strategies, that's 15 or 20% more of your money that you get to keep and pass on to your heirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what it comes down to, to me, it's really 3 things. There's 3. Success is probably a 3-part formula. It's first education. Just be willing to crack a book. If you drive a lot, you get Audible. I love Audible. My daughter gave it to me probably 3 years ago, and I've been hooked ever since. Maybe it was 5 years ago, but I'm always reading and studying. So when I hear something, I do podcasts too. And what's really wonderful about doing this, guys, is you learn so much from the other people interviewing you, people you're interviewing. So I really never used trust much before, other than my own estate planning. That's only been in recent years, and I came across that because I interviewed another gentleman who was using trust all over the place. He owns his cars in trust. They're called personal property trust, And each property has its own trust. And then what he does is, as long as you don't take direct control of the money, like when something is sold, instead of you getting paid, Gary Wilson in my Gary Wilson checking account, I can direct the proceeds to another trust. So you can use another bucket trust to collect all these proceeds from sales of beneficiary rights, and then use that to do something else with it, as long as it stays inside the trust. And what the beautiful thing about that is, 1031 exchange is also very restrictive and limited. You got 45 days to identify the next property or properties. You've got 180 days to close on them. And it has to be like kind exchange. You got to exchange a duplex for a 20plex, for example. Inside of a trust, you don't have those restrictions. You can take your proceeds from the sale of real estate and buy stocks or bonds. So what I'm getting at is, all I did was I got a book on trust, and then I got a training program on trust. Then I started, going online and researching trust and who works for trust and talking to them. You can join clubs, you can join associations and organizations of people that specialize in this thing, and that's really how you learn. So learning followed by information. And the cool thing about us today, we have this wonderful thing called the internet that gives us access to all the information in the world. So you've got education plus information, and the cool thing about the education is it teaches you how to get the information and how to use it. And the third vital step is taking correct action. Well, when you have education, information, you pretty much, I can't use the word guarantee, but you can definitely improve your odds of success by first educating yourself and then getting the right information. That's really what it comes down. I wasn't born with any of this knowledge. I learned every bit of it just by reading and studying.
That's a great point. We obviously can't dive into the details in a 45-minute or an hour-long podcast episode, but the information is out there. It's readily available. You want to become an expert on trust, you can go online today and learn anything and everything there is to know about trust and be an expert 30 days from now. So pick a topic and dive into it. And if you do that once a year, whatever, along the course of your real estate journey, you'll have a lot of different tools in your tool belt that you can deploy in the right situation. One other comment about trusts, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you probably know more about them than I do. They are essentially another entity, kind of like an LLC. And so they do offer at least a little bit of liability protection. And a lot of investors struggle with, well, I own this single family home or this duplex. We had to put it in our own names to get the great, 30-year fixed rate residential conventional financing. And I want to put it in an LLC. Should I put it in an LLC? There's a lot of liability issues that actually you can create by switching over your property to an LLC. You mess up the insurance. You can trigger a due on sale clause from your mortgage. But I find that most mortgage companies and insurance companies are more accepting of a trust. If Jeff Copeland and Claire Copeland own this house and we have the mortgage and the insurance in our names, and all of a sudden the property shows up in the public records as the Jeff Copeland and Claire Copeland Trust, that's not a big deal. It allows us to move those properties over to another entity without screwing up our insurance, without screwing up our mortgage. Now, again, we're not CPAs, we're not attorneys. Right. Don't take this advice and run with it without sitting down with your CPA and your attorney. But just wanted to point out that a trust is an alternative to an LLC. And there's so much discussion about whether or not we should put our properties in an LLC. I hear hardly any discussion about should we put our properties in a trust. Right. And I know we did that in consultation with our attorney when we did our estate planning. All of our rental properties are actually held in trusts.
Good. You want to hear something interesting? We just had a big election last year, and all the politicians were up stumping their campaign and then promoting what they're going to do with the law. They're going to change this and change capital gains and change 1031 exchange and change all that. In my 59 years, I've been voting since I was 18. I've never ever once heard a single politician say, "Hey, we're going to rewrite the trust laws." It'll never happen. It's the oldest form of law in existence. It's trust law. It goes back to old English laws, pre-Magna Carta. And the reason they want to change those is because they use them too. Okay, and it's everybody who has accumulated wealth, everybody I've ever met uses trust to protect their wealth and also provide anonymity. Nobody can see what happened inside the trust. Nobody can see who now is the beneficiary. It's all protected. So it's the highest form. This is my personal opinion. Okay, I'm not an attorney. My personal opinion is trust gives me more benefits and more rights than any other type of structure, including, I'm not against LLCs. I've used bunches of them. I'm just saying trust is like the top of the mountain,
And that brings up another great point that if you're a real estate investor, if you're a year or 2 or 5 or 10 into your investing journey and you own a dozen rental properties, take $500, go sit down with an attorney for a couple of hours. That's probably a going rate, $250 an hour for a good real estate attorney, and talk about this stuff, because I promise you it will save you more than $500 worth of pain and heartache in the long run. And a good attorney and a good CPA are worth every single penny that you spend on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was blessed enough to have my family attorney. He's passed away, but I was with him for a quarter of a century. And he taught me an awful lot. And the thing I like about him is, I gave him a bunch of business, all the property management business, all the legal stuff we had to deal with, and landlord tenant cases. He got all of those cases. All of my clients went to him. So as a result, I got to have conversations with him hours long. He never charged me a dime. I was driving from Pennsylvania to Virginia one time. He was on the phone with me for 3 hours talking about Abraham Lincoln, all kinds of stuff. But what I would tell you is this. There are people out there that decide, I'm going to save some money and do it myself. The challenge is you just don't know what you don't know, right? And you get the most mistakes that occur in life because you made a decision, made a choice, or took some path without having all the information, didn't have all the facts. So a great attorney is going to have all that information. They know, they have the education, they have the information, they know exactly what action to take based on what you want to accomplish. And it absolutely, playing defense, guys, I'm telling you, in my early years, I did a great job of building a lot of wealth and income. And then, through divorce and stuff like that, I lost a lot of it. The second half of life, I'm applying everything I learned in the first half of life. And the thing I'm applying is you have to play defense. You can't just, you want to play offense to score points, right? It doesn't make sense to play defense if you don't have something to protect on the asset side. So, I can teach you how to build wealth and income, but when it comes to the defense, you definitely need a good accountant and a good attorney. Okay, so
that's a great point. I mean, if I broke my leg, I know pretty damn sure I'm going to see an orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah,
everybody would. Mm-hmm. But all too often, when people need to set up an LLC or a trust or a corporation or a will, or they say, "Oh, are my taxes?" Mm-hmm. I'm just going to do it myself. That's probably not the right approach to take, especially once you own a certain number or amount of assets. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're playing defense and protecting your family, protecting your legacy, protecting that passive income.
Yeah. Good point. I appreciate you spearheading that part of the conversation too, because I wouldn't have thought it myself. And the more I think about it, guys, it's probably one of the most important things I could ever suggest to you.
Absolutely.
So
Gary, you're in 28 states with 132 real estate agents affiliated with your team. For our listeners scattered around the country, some of them are probably investors. Many of them probably have their license. How do they get in touch with you? How do they connect with the Global Investor Agent team at EXP?
Sure. So it's called globalinvestoragent.com. They literally just rolled it out last week. And it's not complete, but you can go on there and you can kind of, hear me do a video. You can see some of the training programs, things like that. But more importantly, what I wanted to do with this website is put the agents on the team front and center. I didn't want it being about me. I wanted it being about them. So they're going to now have a profile page front and center right off the homepage. You can go in and search by name or state. Anywhere you are, look for the investor agents in your area. They are trained to identify, analyze, and negotiate off and on market deals for you and me as investors. I know they are because I'm the one that trains them. So they're not just using the MLS guys. In fact, it's a minority of what they do. Most of what they do is going into tax records, property records, county records. We bought access to every county, every property, commercial and residential in the country, they have access to. So they on your behalf, you now have a team member that can really serve you well. So that's my shameless plug.
No, it's a great plug. So to recap, if you are a real estate investor or an aspiring real estate investor, go to globalinvestoragent.com, find your state, and find an agent on Gary's team. You will know that he personally trained them and they know what they're doing. Yeah. If you're an agent in one of these states and you're working for one of the big national companies and they're taking 20, 30, 40% of your commission or more in some cases, go to globalinvestoragent.com, contact Gary, and see what kind of commission split, along with training and those systems that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. At least compare it to what you're doing now, especially if you're an investor agent. That can be a lonely world if you're at Century 21 or Keller Williams or Coldwell Banker as an investment agent or an investor agent. You're sometimes kind of the lone wolf. They put you in that back office. So sometimes it's nice to be part of an investor agent team. And so if you're thinking about getting your license, if you just got your license and you're looking for a place to hang your license, consider Gary's team. You can consider my team if you're here in the St. Pete or the Tampa Bay area, but you couldn't go wrong either way. So, and then I also want to put in another plug for your Massive Passive Cashflow podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong. You guys talk about a little bit of everything on the show. It's not just real estate. It's different. These strategies, we're talking about tax strategies, trusts, REITs, mutual funds. You dive into a lot of varied financial and investing advice that isn't just centered on real estate. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of not just investing in real estate, but building a business around yourself. And the business may, in fact, be real estate, just like I did. So that's why we bring in people who are experts at that type of thing. I'm also a huge proponent of all the agents on my team, not just serving others to earn commissions. We definitely want them to do that. That's part of their income. But another source of income is the agents themselves owning properties. We teach them how to invest as well as teaching investors how to invest and serve them. And the third thing is retirement. So my mission is for agents. If you're listening, if you're an agent, I know what it's like out there because I used to be at one of the big box companies. And it's funny, Jeff, because you were saying that we're kind of the lone wolves. They used to say, well, you're crazy. You guys are crazy. You work with investors. They're crazy. You're crazy. And I'm like, yeah, well, you know what? I get 4 transactions for every one of my clients, and you're only getting 1. But in any case, the point is we bring those people in, and we have a financial plan on our team for agents, so that you have an exit strategy. You don't have to work when you're 80 years old. So in any case, check it out. We've been interviewed, or I've been interviewed by Inman. I've written articles for Inman. EXP publishes its numbers. We're always either 1, 2, or 3, and that tends to attract a lot of attention. It's not for everybody. If you have an interest in investing, you want to be a business person, not just put cookies in the oven on Sunday afternoons with balloons out front. This is what we do, and we always coordinate and cooperate with folks like Jeff Copeland, because he fills a niche that I don't have. I'm not physically in one location. I've got agents everywhere, but I'm a traveling wheelbarrow. I travel all over, and Jeff's strong on commercial. Commercial is one of the things we do, but we're strongest on the small investments, fourplexes and things like that. Jeff is excellent at what he does in the Tampa, St. Pete area. Okay, so if you're coming down from Michigan, Ohio, New York, you need to look up Jeff Copeland and Morgan, right?
Yeah, Copeland Morgan LLC, copelandmorgan.com. Thank you so much for being on today, Gary. This was a fascinating discussion, and like we talked about earlier, you never know what little nuggets of wisdom or little anecdotes that we're going to hit on. I'm fascinated by some of this REIT and mutual fund stuff, and these are just alternative ways for people to invest and protect the assets that they already have. Once again, check out Gary at globalinvestoragent.com. Check out the Massive Passive Cashflow podcast, in addition to subscribing to this podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to the Copeland Morgan Media Real Estate Podcast. As you can imagine, producing this great educational content takes a lot of effort and commitment on our part. We only ask one thing in return. Please subscribe to our podcast using your favorite podcast app or by visiting copelandmorgan.com/podcast. And remember, there's no greater compliment than referring us to a friend or colleague. Until next time, I'm Jeff Copeland.